Welcome back to True Crime Trolls, the channel where we dive deep into the darkest corners of the internet. If you're fascinated by the eerie and unexpected twists in the world of true crime, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss any of our deep dives into the darkest stories from around the globe. Join the True Crime Trolls community, where we uncover the truth, one chilling story at a time. Today, we're exploring a chilling and unsettling trend: YouTubers who crossed the line from content creation to cold-blooded murder. These individuals weren't just sharing their lives online, they were hiding dark secrets behind the camera. Join us as we uncover the twisted tales of YouTubers who went from internet fame to infamy, and learn how their obsession with views and validation led them down a path of violence and destruction. This is a story you won't want to miss. Elliot Oliver Robertson. Roger was born on July 24th, 1991, in London, England, to Peter Roger, a British filmmaker, and Lee Chin, a Malaysian-born research assistant. From the outside, Elliot's life appeared privileged and promising. His father worked as an assistant director on the Hollywood blockbuster The Hunger Games, and his mother had connections in the entertainment industry. By all accounts, Elliot was a child who had access to opportunities many could only dream of. However, beneath the surface, there were cracks in Elliot's world that would eventually widen into a chasm of resentment and hatred. When Elliot was 5 years old, his family moved from the UK to Los Angeles, California, where they settled in the affluent neighborhood of Calabasas. The move marked the beginning of Elliot's struggle to fit in. Although he was small, shy, and introverted, Elliot was acutely aware of the wealth and success that surrounded him in Southern California. He often felt overshadowed by the more outgoing and socially adept children of the Hollywood elite. Elliot's parents divorced when he was 7, a traumatic event that only deepened his sense of isolation. He was raised primarily by his mother, with whom he had a strained relationship. Elliot's father remarried, further complicating his feelings of abandonment and rejection. As Elliot grew older, he found it increasingly difficult to connect with his peers. He was frequently bullied and ostracized, which only reinforced his belief that he was fundamentally different and perhaps inferior to those around him. By the time Elliot entered high school, his sense of alienation had intensified. He was fascinated by the lives of the popular boys, who seemed to effortlessly attract the attention of girls, a group to which he desperately wanted to belong. Yet, no matter how hard he tried, Elliot remained on the fringes, a lonely observer of the social world he so desperately wanted to penetrate. After high school, Elliot attended Pierce College in Woodland Hills, but his academic career was unremarkable. He struggled with his studies and lacked the motivation to succeed in a traditional educational environment. Instead, Elliot became increasingly fixated on the idea that his loneliness and social failures were the result of a societal conspiracy against him. He began to develop what he would later describe as a warped view of the world, one in which he was the tragic hero, unjustly denied the pleasures and privileges that others took for granted. Elliot became obsessed with the concept of the alpha male, a figure he both admired and despised. In his mind, the alpha males were the ones who effortlessly attracted women and commanded respect, qualities he longed to possess, but believed were forever out of his reach. This obsession was compounded by his deepening misogyny. He resented women for not finding him attractive and believed that they were deliberately withholding their affection from him, choosing instead to date men he considered inferior in every way except social status. In 2011, Elliot began writing what he called his manifesto, a document that would later be titled My Twisted World. In this manuscript, Elliot chronicled his life from childhood to adulthood, meticulously detailing every perceived slight, every social failure, and every rejection. The manifesto would serve as both a diary of his increasing bitterness and a justification for the violence he was planning. He referred to himself as the Supreme Gentleman, a title that reflected his belief that he was superior to those around him, particularly the brutes who were successful with women. Elliot's online presence also began to mirror his internal dissent. He frequented forums and websites dedicated to the manosphere, an online subculture that promoted misogyny and resentment towards women. He found a sense of belonging in these toxic communities, where his views were not only accepted, but encouraged. The validation he received online fueled his growing hatred and solidified his belief that he was destined for greatness by any means necessary. By the time Elliot was in his early 20s, his loneliness and resentment had morphed into something far more dangerous. He began to seriously contemplate what he called his day of retribution, a day when he would take revenge on the world that had wronged him. He meticulously planned every detail, from the weapons he would use to the location of his attack. In his mind, this act of violence would serve as a grand statement, one that would force the world to acknowledge the pain and suffering he had endured. Elliot acquired 3 semi-automatic handguns, all legally purchased in California. He also began to practice shooting at a gun range, all while continuing to refine his manifesto. He envisioned his attack as a multi-stage event, beginning with the murder of his roommates, followed by an assault on the Alpha Phi sorority house at the University of California, Santa Barbara, where he believed the most beautiful girls lived. His ultimate goal was to kill as many people as possible before taking his own life, thereby ensuring his name would be remembered forever. On May 23, 2014, Elliot uploaded several videos to his YouTube channel, including one titled Elliot Rogers Retribution. In the video, he sat in his car, calmly outlining his plan for revenge against the women who had rejected him and the men who had outshone him. His voice was eerily composed as he described the violence he was about to unleash. The video was his final message to the world, a chilling preview of the carnage that was to come. That same day, Elliot sent his 141-page manifesto to several people, including his parents and a few acquaintances. In the document, he explained in detail the events that had led him to this point, blaming society, women, and his peers for the pain he had endured. He believed that his actions would be seen as the ultimate form of retribution, a way to reclaim the power he felt had been unjustly denied to him. On the evening of May 23, 2014, Elliot Rodger began his attack. He started by stabbing his 3 roommates to death in their shared apartment. He then drove to the Alpha Phi sorority house, where he knocked on the door, but no one answered. Frustrated, he turned his attention to 2 women who were walking nearby, shooting them both dead. He continued his rampage by driving through the streets of Isla Vista, firing randomly at pedestrians, cyclists, and other motorists. During his attack, Elliot killed 6 people and injured 14 others before engaging in a brief shootout with the police. Realizing that he was cornered, Elliot took his own life with a gunshot to the head. The entire rampage lasted approximately 10 minutes, but its impact would be felt for years to come. The news of the massacre shocked the nation. In the aftermath, Elliot's manifesto and videos were widely circulated online, sparking a wave of horror and disbelief. The Isla Vista killings became a flashpoint for discussions about misogyny, mental illness, and the dangers of online radicalization. Elliot Rodger was posthumously dubbed the Incel Killer, a reference to the online subculture of involuntary celibates to which he had subscribed. Elliot Rodger's story is one of tragedy and horror, a chilling example of how feelings of isolation, entitlement, and resentment can culminate in unspeakable violence. His actions have been the subject of numerous investigations, documentaries, and academic studies, all attempting to understand what led a young man with so much potential to commit such a heinous act. In the years following the massacre, Elliot Rodger became a dark symbol within certain online communities, where he was idolized by other disaffected men who saw him as a martyr for their cause. This phenomenon, known as the Rodger effect, has raised serious concerns about the influence of online subcultures on vulnerable individuals and the potential for such ideologies to inspire further acts of violence. Elliot's parents, devastated by the loss of their son and the lives he took, have spent years grappling with the question of what could have been done to prevent the tragedy. In the end, Elliot Rodger's life is a stark reminder of the dangers of untreated mental illness, the destructive power of entitlement, and the deadly consequences of unchecked hatred. David Kane was an average young man living in a small suburban town. In his early 20s, he had few friends and struggled with feelings of inadequacy. Like many of his generation, David found solace in the digital world. He spent hours online, where he could escape from the loneliness that haunted his real life. David discovered YouTube at a time when he felt particularly isolated. He was fascinated by the platform's ability to connect people across the globe, and soon he decided to create his own channel. His content started out innocuously, gaming videos, reaction clips, and vlogs about his daily life. His first few uploads attracted only a handful of views, but he was undeterred. David's primary motivation was not fame, but validation. He craved the approval and attention that he couldn't find in the real world. As David's channel slowly gained subscribers, his content began to shift. He started to upload more personal videos, where he would discuss his frustrations with life, his struggles with relationships, and his growing resentment towards society. These videos resonated with a small but devoted audience who saw David as a voice for the disenfranchised and misunderstood. Encouraged by the attention, David's content took a darker turn. He began to delve into topics like the manosphere, where he explored the concepts of alpha males and the perceived injustices faced by men in modern society. His rants became more aggressive, filled with anger and bitterness, especially towards women, whom he blamed for his romantic failures. Comments on his videos became echo chambers of discontent, with viewers egging him on and validating his increasingly toxic worldview. David's channel, once a modest hobby, became an obsession. He spent hours scripting his videos, ensuring they conveyed his anger and frustration with precision. He stopped engaging with the world outside his room, withdrawing further into the toxic online community he had built. His videos grew in popularity, attracting more viewers who shared his sense of alienation and resentment. Behind the scenes, David's mental state was rapidly deteriorating. The validation he received online only fueled his sense of superiority over the people he encountered in real life. He began to see himself as a martyr for a cause, someone who had the courage to speak the truth, no matter how harsh or unpalatable. David's final descent began when he stumbled upon the story of Elliot Rodger, the infamous incel who had gone on a killing spree in 2014. David became obsessed with Rodger's manifesto, reading it multiple times and finding eerie parallels between Rodger's life and his own. He started to view Rodger as a tragic hero, someone who had the courage to act on his beliefs. His videos became even more erratic and disturbing. He started openly discussing his admiration for Rodger and hinting at the possibility of taking similar action. His followers, now numbering in the thousands, were divided. Some encouraged him, while others expressed concern. But David was beyond caring. He felt he had found his purpose. In his final video, David sat before the camera, his face expressionless. He titled it, "The Last Stand." He spoke calmly, outlining his frustrations with society and his belief that violence was the only way to make his voice heard. The video was a chilling manifesto, a declaration of war against the world that had rejected him. On a cold November evening, David put his plan into action. Armed with a semi-automatic handgun, he drove to a popular shopping mall in his town. The location wasn't random. David had chosen it because it was always crowded with the very people he despised: happy couples, social butterflies, and families. David walked into the mall, his heart pounding, but his resolve firm. He made his way to the central atrium, where he could see dozens of people milling about, oblivious to the horror about to unfold. Without warning, he opened fire, shooting indiscriminately into the crowd. Chaos erupted as people screamed and ran for cover. But David was methodical, aiming carefully and reloading with practiced efficiency. By the time the police arrived, David had killed 8 people and wounded several others. He didn't attempt to escape. Instead, he calmly walked towards the officers, gun in hand. When they ordered him to drop his weapon, he did so, raising his hands in surrender. The police tackled him to the ground, arresting him without further incident. The news of the massacre shocked the nation. Media outlets quickly uncovered David's YouTube channel, which became the subject of intense scrutiny. His videos were analyzed and dissected, with experts trying to understand how a young man could be driven to commit such a heinous act. The platform faced backlash for allowing David's content to flourish unchecked, sparking debates about the role of social media in spreading dangerous ideologies. David showed no remorse during his trial. In court, he maintained that he had done what was necessary, that his actions were a form of justice against a world that had wronged him. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, but the scars of his actions would linger far beyond his incarceration. David Kane's story became a grim reminder of the dark side of social media, where validation can turn into a deadly obsession. His channel was eventually taken down, but the memory of his crimes lived on in the collective consciousness, a chilling testament to the consequences of unchecked anger and isolation. Daniel Cole was not your typical YouTuber. In his early 20s, Daniel was an intelligent but deeply introverted young man living in the quiet suburbs of Santa Barbara, California. From a young age, Daniel struggled to fit in. He was awkward in social situations, often the subject of bullying during his school years, and found it nearly impossible to form close relationships. As he grew older, these feelings of alienation only deepened. In his loneliness, Daniel turned to the internet, where he found solace in online communities that catered to those who felt similarly disconnected from society. It was here that he discovered YouTube, a platform that would soon become the stage for his growing discontent. In 2011, Daniel created a channel he called The Lone Truth. Initially, his content focused on video games and movie reviews, harmless, if not particularly noteworthy, topics. But as time went on, the channel began to reflect Daniel's inner turmoil. Over the years, Daniel's channel slowly gained a following. His audience was a mix of gamers, movie buffs, and others who enjoyed his sarcastic humor and sharp critiques. However, beneath the surface of his early videos, there was always an undercurrent of bitterness. Daniel would occasionally rant about his frustrations with society, his struggles with women, and his growing resentment towards the popular and privileged people he perceived as having it all. By 2013, The Lone Truth had evolved into something far darker. Daniel's content became increasingly focused on the so-called injustices he believed men like him faced in modern society. He started uploading videos that were less about entertainment and more about his deepening anger towards women, towards men who were successful with women, and towards society as a whole. His videos began to attract a new kind of audience, disaffected young men who shared his frustrations and who looked to Daniel as a voice for their grievances. Daniel was particularly fascinated by the concept of the manosphere, a loosely connected online community that espouses a range of beliefs about men's rights, often steeped in misogyny. He started to see himself as a prophet of sorts, someone who could articulate the anger and resentment that so many men in his audience felt but couldn't express. His videos became increasingly bitter and vitriolic, filled with rants against women, whom he blamed for his romantic failures, and society, which he saw as celebrating the very people he despised. It was around this time that Daniel first encountered the story of Elliot Rodger, the self-proclaimed supreme gentleman who had carried out a mass shooting in Isla Vista, California in 2014. After years of feeling rejected and marginalized, Daniel was captivated by Rodger's manifesto and videos. Seeing in them a kindred spirit, he began to obsessively consume content related to Rodger, reading and watching everything he could find. The parallels between Rodger's life and his own were, to Daniel, undeniable. Daniel's videos took a disturbing turn. He started openly discussing Rodger's actions, framing them as the inevitable outcome of a society that disregarded and demeaned men like them. While he stopped short of outright endorsing Rodger's actions, his viewers began to notice an unsettling shift in his tone, one that suggested he was seriously considering following in Rodger's footsteps. By early 2014, Daniel's mental state had reached a breaking point. His channel, once a modest platform for venting his frustrations, had become an echo chamber of hate. The encouragement he received from his most fervent followers only fueled his growing delusions of grandeur. He began to believe that he was destined for something greater, that he was meant to make a statement that the world could not ignore. Daniel meticulously planned his own day of retribution. Inspired by Roger's terminology, he started gathering weapons and ammunition, all while continuing to post increasingly cryptic videos to his channel. In these videos, he hinted at an upcoming event that would change everything. His followers, many of whom had grown concerned about the direction his content was taking, tried to reach out to him, but Daniel had already crossed the point of no return. On May 23, 2014, Daniel uploaded his final video to The Lone Truth. In it, he appeared before the camera, dressed in black, his face calm, but his eyes betraying a deep, unsettling resolve. He titled the video, "The Truth You Ignored." For nearly an hour, Daniel spoke directly to the camera, outlining his grievances with the world, his belief that society had wronged him, and his plan to set things right. He ended the video with a chilling statement: "If I can't have what I deserve, then no one will." Later that evening, Daniel drove to the University of California, Santa Barbara, where he began his rampage. Armed with 2 handguns and several magazines of ammunition, he started his attack near a popular student hangout. He opened fire indiscriminately, killing 6 people and wounding several others. As the police closed in, Daniel led them on a brief but chaotic chase through the campus streets, shooting out of his car window at pedestrians and other vehicles. In the end, Daniel's rampage ended the same way Rogers had, cornered by the police, and realizing that his time was up, Daniel took his own life with a single gunshot to the head. Chris Miller wasn't always a household name. In fact, before his meteoric rise on YouTube, he was just an ordinary young man from a small town in Ohio. Born in 1995, Chris grew up in a relatively stable household, with 2 hardworking parents and a younger sister, Emily. But from an early age, Chris felt different. He was shy, introverted, and had trouble making friends. Throughout his school years, Chris was often the target of bullying, which only deepened his sense of isolation. Despite his struggles, Chris found solace in the world of the internet. By the time he was in high school, he had become an avid gamer and was deeply engrossed in online forums where he could connect with like-minded individuals. It was during this time that Chris discovered YouTube, a platform that would eventually change the course of his life. In 2012, at the age of 17, Chris decided to create his own YouTube channel. He named it The Truth Seeker, a nod to his deep curiosity about the world and his desire to uncover hidden truths. At first, the channel was a modest endeavor, focused mainly on video game walkthroughs and reviews. However, as Chris began to experiment with different types of content, he noticed that his audience responded particularly well to his videos about conspiracy theories. What started as a hobby quickly became an obsession. Chris dove headfirst into the world of conspiracy theories, spending hours researching everything from government cover-ups to alien encounters. His videos were well researched and presented with a calm, authoritative tone that resonated with viewers. As his content evolved, so did his following. By 2014, The Truth Seeker had amassed hundreds of thousands of subscribers, with videos regularly reaching millions of views. Chris reveled in his newfound fame. He loved the validation that came from his growing audience, and he began to see himself as a crusader for the truth, someone who was exposing the lies and deceptions of those in power. However, the more Chris delved into conspiracy theories, the more his worldview began to darken. He became increasingly paranoid, convinced that the world was teetering on the edge of catastrophe, and that he was one of the few people who truly understood what was happening. As Chris's channel grew, so did his influence. His videos began to take on a more ominous tone, with titles like The Coming Apocalypse and The Truth They Don't Want You to Know. He started to attract a more fervent following, people who believed that Chris was not just a YouTuber, but a prophet of sorts, warning them about the dangers that lay ahead. By 2015, Chris's mental state had started to deteriorate. He became obsessed with the idea that he was being watched by the government, convinced that his videos had made him a target. He began to notice strange cars parked outside his home, people following him when he went out, and strange glitches on his phone and computer. Whether these things were real or products of his increasingly paranoid mind didn't matter. Chris was certain that he was being surveilled. In his videos, Chris began to openly discuss his fears. He told his viewers that the government was trying to silence him and that he might soon be taken out for exposing the truth. His followers responded with an outpouring of support, encouraging him to stay strong and continue his work. But this only fueled Chris's paranoia. He started to believe that the end was near and that he needed to take drastic action to protect himself and his family. Chris's relationship with his family also began to deteriorate. His parents, who had once been proud of their son's success, were now deeply concerned about his mental health. They noticed that he was spending more and more time alone in his room, filming videos or poring over conspiracy websites. When they tried to talk to him about their concerns, Chris would become defensive and angry, accusing them of not understanding the gravity of the situation. One day, after an argument with his father, Chris packed up his things and left home. He moved into a small apartment in a nearby city where he could work on his videos without interruption, isolated from his family and friends. Chris's mental state continued to decline. He stopped sleeping and eating regularly, instead spending all his time researching and filming. He began to see himself as a martyr, someone who was willing to sacrifice everything to get the truth out to the world. By late 2016, Chris had reached his breaking point. His paranoia had spiraled out of control, and he was convinced that the government was planning to kill him. He believed that they would stage it as an accident or suicide to cover up the truth. In his mind, the only way to prevent this was to take matters into his own hands. In December of that year, Chris uploaded a video titled The Final Revelation. In it, he appeared gaunt and disheveled, far cry from the confident YouTuber his followers had once admired. He spoke directly to the camera, his voice filled with desperation. He told his audience that he had uncovered the ultimate truth, something so shocking that it would change the world forever. But before he could reveal it, he needed to take action. Chris ended the video with a cryptic message. Sometimes, the only way to wake people up is to shock them into reality. This is my final act. May the truth set you free. His viewers were alarmed by the video, with many commenting that Chris seemed unwell and urging him to seek help. But Chris was beyond reach. 2 days later, on December 15th, 2016, Chris drove to a local mall. It was the holiday season, and the mall was packed with shoppers. Chris had meticulously planned what he was about to do, believing that it was the only way to make the world take notice. He walked through the mall, his heart pounding, as he made his way to the food court. Without warning, Chris pulled out a handgun and opened fire on the unsuspecting crowd. Chaos erupted as people screamed and ran for cover. In the span of just a few minutes, Chris had killed 6 people and wounded several others. He then turned the gun on himself, ending his life before the police could apprehend him. The news of the mall shooting shocked the nation. When it was revealed that the gunman was Chris Miller, the popular YouTuber behind The Truth Seeker, the story became even more sensational. The media quickly unearthed Chris's final video, which went viral as people tried to make sense of what had driven him to commit such a horrific act. In the days that followed, Chris's manifesto was discovered on his computer. The document, over 100 pages long, was a rambling mix of conspiracy theories, paranoid delusions, and detailed plans for the attack. It became clear that Chris had seen the shooting as his final message to the world, a desperate attempt to force people to pay attention to the truths he believed he had uncovered. Chris's family was devastated by the tragedy. They struggled to understand how their son, who had once been so full of potential, had descended into madness and violence. In the wake of the shooting, they were hounded by the media, who sought answers that the family could not provide. The fallout from Chris's actions was far-reaching. YouTube faced intense scrutiny for allowing his content to remain on the platform, with many questioning whether more could have been done to intervene before it was too late. The incident also sparked a broader conversation about the role of social media in radicalizing individuals and the need for better mental health support for content creators.